Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our open conversation with neuropsychologist and lifelong learner, Bia Adams. Today, we'll talk about the ways in which curiosity and continuous learning can transform personal growth and mental well-being. I'm Curt Newton, director of MIT OpenCourseWare. OpenCourseWare is a free and open collection of materials from thousands of MIT courses covering the entire MIT curriculum. We create new opportunities for millions of learners and educators, share open education resources from MIT, and help lead a global revolution in free access to knowledge. This is the third event in the Open Conversation series, which focuses on how open learning can empower people to improve their lives, communities, and the world. Our guest today is Beia Adams. Beia has been on a fascinating and inspiring journey, from an initial degree and work in clinical and behavioral psychology, to dance with the London Contemporary Dance School and the Royal Ballet, and then back to psychology, extending into computational neuroscience and related fields, with MIT Open Learning resources. Thank you, Beia, for joining us today. There's so much to get to explore and share. Really looking forward to it. So if we might begin, with your wonderful accomplishments, academic and in personal pursuits. Beia, would you please share with us some of the themes and through lines in your career and your personal growth and how curiosity has played a role in this journey?
Hi, Curt. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to finally be here. A few things about myself. I'm a neuropsychologist, as you said, and I'm a former professional dancer. I'm also a lifelong learning. My career has been built across diverse experiences, but I think I've always retained an interest in lifelong learning. I like to say that if money and jobs were not concepts, I would happily be a forever student. I started dancing when I was four and a half. What my mom thought would be just a few lessons of ballet turned into many years of dancing. I've spent most of my childhood and teens dancing. Then I've studied psychology, clinical and cognitive. I worked as a psychologist for a few years. Then in my mid-20s, I went on an extended sabbatical because I wanted to explore dance a bit more, and I wanted to perform a bit more. So this time I studied contemporary dance at London Contemporary Dance School, and I performed for a few years. I also explored with other movement practices. I managed to get a black belt in Aikido. I started skateboarding, longboarding, which of course led to quite a few injuries. And due to those, and also because I'd really developed an interest in the neuroscience part of psychology, I went back to psychology and I resumed my studies. And I eventually specialized in medical neuroscience and started working as a neuropsychologist, which is what I do now. I still dance, albeit not professionally, but I do it regularly and with much joy. I discovered MIT open courses in 2022. It was, yes, and I completed several from various fields. And I'm planning to actually approach more in next year. Other than that, I'm multilingual. I grew up speaking several languages and then acquired more. One of my projects, every 5 years I try to approach a new language, and I'm doing that at the moment. I find I'm curious about how new languages work and how structure arises out of them. Also this year, I finished writing my first book of fiction to be released next year. It's called Humans After All, and if you watch my online spaces, you will see excerpts from it already, and hopefully the final result next year. Yeah, you asked me about curiosity. I think curiosity has been there throughout my development. I was I've always been drawn by movement and interested in movement, how it arises, how our bodies move, why we are able to do things and why we are not able to do things. So I think when I started doing ballet, I was drawn. Curiosity helped me dissect movement, understand technique, understand timing, how movement relates to music, another big interest of mine. Then also the expression, the possibilities of expression that arise out of technique, right? Not just the series of steps. So what I didn't know then, but I appreciate now as a psychologist, is that this curiosity I had activated the dopaminergic system in the brain, the reward system. That's something which makes you, go after things. It opens the door to learning, and it also makes you a bit more cognitively flexible, so that you can, adapt to learning. And through, the connections that the dopaminergic system has with the hippocampus to consolidate what you've learned. So I didn't know then that I was actually priming my brain for deep learning without even knowing what deep learning was. Later on, when I transitioned to neuroscience, I think curiosity served almost had a protective role, because instead of interpreting this change as a change in career, almost in identity, I looked at it as an opportunity to explore something new, explore something meaningful, right? And I think that's important in periods when that we associate with identity. I was a dancer, and then I became a scientist. So instead of interpreting this change as a threat, I try to look at it through the eyes of the explorer. What could come out of this? And I think that reframes uncertainty, and it reframes ambiguity, which our brains are not very good at tolerating. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. That spirit of exploration, is so fundamental to what we can get up to, and thank you for sharing, that sort of path. Yeah. I would share that, what we've learned about the people who use MIT OpenCourseWare more broadly from around the world, they're coming from a lot of different, positions. Some of them are enrolled students, some of them are educators trying to figure out how to teach more effectively. Many of them are just curious, independent learners. And what we've heard, from everyone kind of across the board, that the number one reason why they're coming to these resources because they have this fundamental curiosity. It's, and there's often, other reasons beyond that, but it's just really interesting that force is out there, so widely reflected, and you've definitely been living it. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, curiosity, if we look at the way curiosity arises in the brain, I think that will probably, just answer your curiosity and your question a bit more. We become more curious when our brains detect an information gap, right? When we sense that there's something we don't know, but we could know, that there's something we don't fully understand, but we could understand. And when the brain detects this gap, it sets in motion the same dopaminergic system I mentioned earlier, that in turn prepares the neurochemical milieu, the dopamine required to create the motivation to go out there, seek the missing information, and close the gap. And it's exactly this exploratory behavior I'm quite confident that a lot of learners already have some knowledge from certain fields, but there is that information gap. That's something they wish they would know more of and more from, and that once they find the platform, once they find the source of knowledge, they just they seize it, because that's what the brain does, right? They have all the support, the neurobiological support to do that.
Yeah, and it never stops, right? Those questions, that sense of, oh, here's a gap, here's a new thing. We certainly feel that when we're young all the time, but it also it never stops, right? And so to be able to support people at every age of life, continuing to explore that stuff, as you've been doing, feels just really, really important and useful. Yeah.
It's self-replenishing, I would say.
Yeah.
It never stops. Once you answer, you find an answer to one question, that another one arises. So I totally agree. And that's actually an important thing to note. Curiosity and motivation, they're not personality traits. You're not born with them and they stay rigid for the rest of their life. They are practice. They are tools and facets of one's behavior that need constant practice. And the more you practice, the more will come out of them. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I wonder if you have a perspective on how living a life of curiosity supports one's just sort of broader sense of well-being and connection in the world, through your own experience, or the work that you're doing with other people. What have you seen about that?
Well, curiosity per se, the act of engaging curiosity and motivation to engage in new pursuits. And mind you, when I say learning, curiosity to learn something new and the motivation to learn something new, I don't mean just abstract stuff. Actually, it's preferred from a neuroscientific point of view for it to be multimodal, right? Cognitive, motor, social, emotional, because it recruits more areas of the brain, going by the same principle of lose it or use it, or use it or lose it. So maintaining a curious approach to life, maintaining curiosity, and engaging with new learning material, with lifelong learning, has quite a few benefits. And why it is important? It's because it literally changes the brain. It drives what we call neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself in response to experience, in response to new learning. So applied curiosity in new learning rewires the brain. You form new circuits. You allow for neurogenesis, the formation of the genesis of new neurons in some areas of the brain, particularly the hippocampus. It also acts as a protective buffer against age-related cognitive decline. It slows down, lowers the incidence of dementia. Let us not forget the social benefits that come with, being curious and engaging in new pursuits with others. Just the act of doing something with others, of proving oneself to be capable, of being competent, the feeling of self-efficacy, of mastery. They build confidence, and all these things are proven to reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression and isolation. Also, when you see a curiosity, neuroscience shows us that when curiosity is high, our brains switch from networks that preferentially process threat to networks that allow for exploration, for curious approach, for going out and exploring one's territory. That also goes hand in hand with, let's call it cognitive flexibility, with the ability to reappraise a situation, not in terms of threat, but in terms of exploration. So maintaining this mindset of what else, how else could I look at a situation? What else is there to find out about this? How can I look at this from a different perspective? Or then, what else is there that I feel I could know, but I don't. I don't yet understand, but I know I could. The missing puzzle. How do I find it? The brain loves puzzles. That sense of curiosity, it helps us, like we said, like I said before, reframe uncertainty. But it also, it also puts us in a situation where we also become, more resilient. We allow for the brain's instances of cognitive reappraisal and reframing of a situation to work, so that we have a better stress response, right? We better decision making. The impact of stress on emotional circuits in the limbic system is reduced. So curiosity is not just learning new material. It actually impacts mental health and resilience long term.
Wow, yeah, that I love hearing that reflection. We at OpenCourseWare, at Open Learning, we hear from so many people around the world that they've been able to make use of our resources when they are living in various sort of disrupted situations in their lives. I mean, lives are complicated, and having these materials shared openly and freely with the world, clearly people's lives have some stresses in them, but they're able to tap into, some foundational, I guess, curiosities to, despite or working through with resilience those disruptions, continue to keep learning. And we love hearing the stories reporting back about how they continue to be able to keep learning. People. I'm remembering OpenCourseWare. We have this Chalk Radio podcast, and we just did a series of hearing from learners around the world. Specifically, we heard a story from a person named Laftula in Afghanistan who was living in a situation where could not count on having internet access from day to day, from hour to hour, and all sorts of other disruptions, but we're able to make use of the materials that we've shared to keep learning, and how just vitally useful that was. We hear those stories again and again, so it does seem to switch something for people, and really glad that we can help support that.
Yeah, and it's the occurrence of what you said is supported by very clearly defined structures in the brain, and again it's the midbrain, the dopaminergic subsystem in the midbrain, mainly the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, which allow for this sense of purpose, right? For this sense of the micro wins, of maybe understanding. It doesn't have to be, the big goal and the big monster. It can be the small gremlin that you finally tame and you learn how to deal with. But it's those micro wins, that feeling of process that, I may not have understood the full thing, but at least I've got this much, I mastered this much, and maybe tomorrow I'll make sense of the next bit, and next week I'll make sense of the next bit, and that gives a sense of progress, but also of purpose, of goal-directed behavior, which in times of hardship, in times of duress and distress, is what keeps you going. And it can be as little as like I said, it doesn't have to be abstract. It can be learning how to play a new instrument, or learning how to, that's not a small thing, learning how to code. I've actually approached Annabelle's code AI and computer science course, so it reminds me of that. Yeah. Maybe it has even a stronger impact on people who go through difficult times, because again, it gives you that something to look for, to look forward to. That's something to mobilize your resources towards, which is so important in the staving off, in staunching symptoms of hopelessness, which are very closely linked with depression and crippling anxiety. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. What I'm hearing in your description is this process of building confidence bit by bit too. You start from a place of realizing, hey, there's something that I don't know that I'm curious about, and building that confidence. That confidence can be really infectious in a good way.
No, you're spot on. Now that I told you I'm learning, I'm approaching foreign languages, and I was saying to my friend, when I sit down to relearn, I call it relearning Hebrew because I sort of knew something from before, and I'm drawn to it because it forces my brain to do things counterintuitively. The same way I experienced with when I started Aikido. It's against the way my brain would do it, right? Not only is it right to left, but it's a whole different grammar structure. So it, puts me in a situation of discomfort. So I'm sometimes overwhelmed. I don't know whether I'll be able to make sense of it, but there are micro wins. If I manage to understand this much, then the next day I'll sit down and say, okay, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens today. Let's see what I make sense of today. So I become a bit more confident because it's yet another small milestone that I've conquered. I'm this much closer to something which I don't even know where it is in time and in space, but I become more confident. And that takes me back to when I retrained in neuropsychology. I remember I had to learn a lot of neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, diagnostics, and it was, oftentimes it was quite intimidating. It was overwhelming. But even, the small win of understanding how cranial nerves work, or finding the acronym to remember something, or nailing a small differential diagnosis, that not only did it make me happy, right, through the same reward circuitry, but it boosted my motivation, the big M word, to carry on. So it actually kept me on track. Otherwise, perhaps I would have given up if I looked at this whole chunk as, oh God, here's the big monster. So I agree with you. Building confidence slowly is definitely something that we see with lifelong learners, people who engage in lifelong learning.
Yeah. This brings to mind, stories that we hear from so many people, especially older learners. I think there's a way in which we're conditioned as older people to think we're supposed to know stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that moving into that space of not knowing can be sort of uncomfortable. But we hear from so many people, I studied this subject back in school and it didn't make sense to me. And suddenly, thank you, OpenCourseWare, for instance, for giving me this alternate explanation. Suddenly now I understand. I've kind of recovered that sense of I can come back to this and take another try at it, and just how transformative that can be for people, no matter what stage in life they're at. Got to keep doing
Absolutely. It also, I like to say this tongue in cheek, that it stops you, it prevents one from taking oneself too seriously, right? Keeping humble. A lot of us, especially if there's something we become good at, hopefully, we tend to think that we know the answers to all the questions, or what we know is enough. But it's always good to have this reality check that, there's something there you don't know, or there may be another way to look at it. And that again takes us back to cognitive flexibility, right? It's something that tends to, because of how brain function declines physiologically, cognitive flexibility, fluidity of thinking and of appraising reality and what's being internalized as knowledge is a bit lost. So, working on that wiring through lifelong learning, through complex work, through, like you said, learning new things or revisiting new things, through mentally stimulating hobbies, it sort of allows for the looseness of that circuitry to be maintained, and also for the distance from yourself that sometimes is needed to just be able to learn new things and to look at the world with different eyes. It's a humble thing to be able to do that later in life.
Do you ever have people who have learned about your story say something like, "I just don't know how I would have time to learn all of these things"? How do you find the time?
Yeah, I
How
get
do you
that.
create that
I
space?
get that in the sauna. I get that at work. I get that. I get that. And my answer is, how do you know? I actually did that question. My answer is usually, well, I'm old. So I've had time to do all those things. That's usually my go-to get out of jail-free card. I usually say, well, I'm old. I've been around since forever. I've had time to do these things. But then, maybe the more complex, less tongue-in-cheek answer would be, I really enjoyed what I did. I never, even now, people say, oh, why do you swim 5 days a week? I'm like, I actually enjoy doing it. It's not an ordeal. Most of the things I've done because I was really drawn to them. So for me, it's joy. This is joy. There are clearly things that I would rather not do, and they are there just to maintain something, having to do strength in order to maintain flexibility. But I actually, like you said, it's self-replenishing, it's self-perpetuating. Like now, I can't stop learning this foreign language. I wake up and I think, maybe I want to make sense of that. So I think it's something that I was encouraged to do. Also, I had good parental encouragement growing up, and luckily I had the context in the environment to pursue some interests. And I maintained, like I said, this practice. I maintained the curiosity and the motivation, and also the discipline, which deserves another conversation altogether, to do these things. And then, to complete the answer, they've brought me enough reward to keep me going. It was not something I did just for the sake of doing. I got a lot out of it, enough to keep going.
Yeah. Curious to hear a little bit more maybe about your sense of the social aspects of being a lifelong learner, in addition to all the things that we individually are drawn into. How have you experienced in your life sharing it with other people, or bringing other people into these sort of journeys, and things you might want to share with our viewers about that?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's like you read my mind. I actually meant to bring this into the conversation. How and maybe part of it I discuss in sort of a fiction context in this book I've finished writing. How important the social dimension of learning is in general, and also how important it's been for me, and how intrinsic it is to sometimes just stay on track and to maintain the motivation to keep going. And it's something which is perhaps slightly waning in the modern world. The act of learning with others, the act of sharing knowledge with others, we're in this together. As hard as it gets, we're learning this together, or we're learning from each other. To me, has been very important. Although, in terms of personality, maybe I actually prefer, especially when it comes to abstract knowledge, to learn alone. But then I like to share. I like to have somebody to have shared reflection with. And it also helps with accountability, you know. I remember, well, it could be a discussion forum, but learning with somebody else, a study buddy, right? Preferably a human study buddy, helps with. I've already mentioned accountability and, you know, comprehension and sharing understanding of material. But what it also does, I've noticed, especially when, you know, you study something which is hard, and there are obstacles along the way, and fatigue rears its ugly head. Having a study buddy helps with eliminating or reducing the sense of isolation that can come out of, you know, months and months of being engaged in hard study. And sometimes it's that sense of isolation that can halt progress. So to me, it's been important to have somebody to, when it came to academic pursuits, it was important to have somebody to even meet and have a conversation about, you know, tomorrow's exam or what had to be studied. I was lucky to have a good friend in university, and I'm forever grateful to her for, you know, being my study buddy, human study buddy. And when it comes to other types of learning, of course, you know, just sharing the fact that, you know, let me show you how I've learned to play guitar, or you show me this dance piece and I'll try to copy you. It creates a sense of cohesion and also a sense of mastery. Like I've mentioned before, a sense of efficacy. I'm showing you that I'm good at this. I'm showing you that I'm competent enough to do this. And then there's the feedback that comes back to me, and I feel competent, right? Through the same social reward, and the circuitry that supports it is back mirrored to me. And in turn, I feel more competent. And that's extremely important. And again, it helps with resilience, you know, with grit.
Yeah.
So social learning, I couldn't encourage it more. And I think learning per se, we've already said, you know, we've already outlined the benefits, the lifelong benefits that come with just being engaged in learning. But there's also the aspect of, you know, if we were to visualize this, you know, like a sort of visual vignette, you have this learning window or door, let's call it, and you have curiosity and motivation which help you take the first steps through. Good job I didn't say window. So they tell you take the first step through the learning door. Yeah. And then you have the discipline and the rigor and the structure which keep you on track. But then I think you also need a sense of community to anchor you into something which hopefully will become larger than yourself. So I couldn't stress more the benefits of social learning and just, you know, doing it with other humans.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it makes me think of MIT's motto, you know, mind and hand. You know, yeah. Yes, there's the learning part of it, the intellectual part of it, but the hand part, the doing, in particular, I think has this way of just bringing other people into the process. You know, we demonstrate the things that we're learning, you know, through the hand, through the activities out in the world. You know, we're creating opportunities to engage with other people. You know, and I know in my personal life, I've been on a learning journey for over a decade about climate change and how to respond to these, you know, intersecting challenges, and, you know, the things that it calls me into, you know, to share my learnings have to do with, like, how do we show up for civic engagement, you know, as a citizen, how to get engaged there. So there's this continuous feedback loop between learning new things and showing up in social spaces, you know, to both demonstrate what I've learned, but also ask those questions that are still ringing, that sort of lead me into the next thing. I'll also note, you know, it's not part of MIT's official motto, but informally, mind, hand, and heart, you know, showing up for all of this, with our full selves is a really important part of it as well. I think of the heart part of it as very connected with, that feeling of curiosity. What is it that spark or that small flame that opens up is kind of the heart piece. So just enjoy riffing on that for a moment.
I totally agree, and I absolutely love MIT's motto. I like maybe I mentioned earlier this aspect of embodied cognition. And I touched on it briefly earlier when I mentioned multimodal learning, and just learning through all modalities, which is actually preferred. And the brain likes that because it recruits more areas, it allocates more resources from various bits, and it's also it's been quite the buzzword in the last few years, embodied cognition, and how, because there's both top-down regulation of processes and bottom-up, right? It's not just the brain dictating everything into the body. It actually, what happens and how emotion and behavior arises is both top-down and bottom-up. What comes through the senses, what comes from the outside, going all the way up into the higher instances of the brain, and top-down as well. So I'm happy you touched on that, because it's linked with, as I said, this buzzword, embodied cognition.
And if I may, reflecting on the social aspect of this, we're so grateful for all of the people who are watching our live stream right now and who registered, and we got so many questions from people, about the sort of broader themes that we'd be talking about today. Maybe I'll turn some of our attention to what we've heard from those questions here. I think we got over 100 questions that were submitted, and our team has done some valiant work trying to group these into some themes, that people out in the world are wondering about, especially around curiosity. So here's this first one. Bia, do you think curiosity is a learnable skill? And if so, what strategies might help individuals and communities to develop and reinforce and carry it forward?
Curiosity, we've said, right? Let me think about the question. So is curiosity learnable?
Or can it be developed, maybe?
Can it be enhanced, right? So straight off the bat, there are no chemical, pharmacological stimulants that could enhance or create curiosity, at least not in a healthy way. But there are cognitive and emotional conditions that we could create to enhance curiosity. Well, this question, actually, very good one, takes me back to what we mentioned earlier, right? About how curiosity arising when the brain detects this information gap, right? So why do we become curious? Because we know that there's something we don't yet know, or we can't yet do, or we don't yet understand, but we could. So the brain sets in motion its tried and tested ways to make us motivated to go out there and find the missing piece in the puzzle. So how could we create the context in which curiosity peaks? I've noticed both in dance and neuroscience but mainly neuroscience has confirmed this, that the human brain likes and at the same time hates incomplete puzzles. And that's tied in with the information gap. When the brain detects that there is a missing puzzle, it will increase motivation to go out there and find it, right? We like to find the missing gap. So sometimes if we frame the learning material and the question in such a way that we sense that there's something we don't yet know, our brains will do what needs to be done to put us in the situation where we can go out and find the missing piece. So that's usually a strategy. Then, novelty. Novelty is, bringing new things into our reality, into our environment can spike curiosity. Brain loves novelty, new perspectives, new ways of looking at the world, new tools. New tools are great. Like, how do I use this? New angles into a problem. That's what novelty spikes curiosity. Also, that gets me thinking about something that a friend of mine mentioned the other day, Tim. He said that he feels more curious and more motivated to do things, and also performs better when he feels free, or I would say autonomous. And just to get my disclaimer in early, by autonomous, I don't mean anarchy. By autonomy, I mean the freedom to explore, to sometimes choose the question rather than engaging in the type of learning that where you just have to learn given material all the time. The sense of agency, the sense of, I'm the one who does the exploration, and sometimes if we don't choose the answer, we at least choose the question. Also, feeling, the sense of sometimes feeling safe, maybe that's the word, and I will explain. The sense of that low stake, not always engaging in high stakes environment. Not that their environments, not that they're bad and they're not conducive to progress or mastery or competence, but because the constant involvement in a high stake, slightly threatening environment dampens curiosity. As we've said before, curiosity spikes when the brain shifts from threat perception networks to exploratory networks. So sometimes feeling a bit looser, a bit more comfortable in an environment with lower stakes can set off exploratory behavior. If we're constantly engaged in learning activities that titillate the brain's defense mechanisms, we tend to become less curious, and then motivation goes down a bit. So to answer the question, frame, look for puzzles, incomplete puzzles, novelty, autonomy to explore, and then, find environments where you feel looser, not constantly judged, not constantly evaluated and stuck labels on. I think that helps with long-term sustainment and sustainment and enhancing of curiosity and the motivation to back it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it leads me to another set of questions we got from some folks, which I will summarize as, while we've been singing curiosity's praises, are there ways in which one might be too curious? Are there ways that we might want to think about managing that curiosity to particular ends versus just welcoming it with open arms?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's an interesting
Isn't
question.
it?
Becoming too curious, as in dabbing into an excessive number of interests.
Yeah, well, I think we can interpret it. You were talking about novelty and how novelty is the brain loves novelty. I assume.
No, you're right. The brain,
Yeah.
No, you're totally right.
Yeah.
The brain loves novelty, but if there's one thing that the brain can't do, as much as we would like to think that, and as much as biohackers promise us, the brain can't process unlimited input.
Yeah.
Right. Cognitive fatigue is a real thing, and it's mainly due to the prefrontal cortex, which is sits just here below the forehead, being metabolically extremely costly, and it fatigues easily, and performance goes down. So if becoming too curious about too many things at one specific time leads to cognitive overload, then you have a problem, right? Because there's mental clutter. you won't see clearly. You won't see as clearly. The brain's analytical instances won't be as well equipped to, one, comprehend and make sense of what's being learned, to also evaluate evidence, right? If it's something that, requires, seeking truth, or, figuring out whether, trying to make sense of things, that mental clutter, that prefrontal fatigue, right? Prefrontal fatigue, actually, the prefrontal cortex fatigues because of for two reasons. One, when multitasking, and two, when having to switch between sources of information. So, being too curious, as in being a bit, jumpy and frivolous about what you allow your attention to go towards, if that leads to cognitive overwhelm, that those analytical instances of the brain won't do their job as well. Yeah, so you need to filter, you need to curate, and then to focus and concentrate, just to keep cognitive fatigue and cognitive overload from happening. So I would say that is a caveat. When plus you just don't have enough attentional power. It's mainly an issue of computation. Mainly, it's just brain limitation. But when one maintains enough distance to become their own filter and curator, then hopefully it will get distilled to what actually deserves your attention and what doesn't.
Yeah, this makes me think of this interesting balance that we have found ourselves in with OpenCourseWare and our MIT free online open courses. That there's a way in which the sort of information system online is now really good at feeding that wish for dopamine hits, right? And the novelty continuous. And on the other hand, there might be things that are out in the world that are just like too big to take on, right? Require too much persistence. But by sharing materials like OpenCourseWare does, here's materials framed within, say, a course in which they were taught, but here's the materials openly for you to sort of make your way through. There's enough of a container that you can sort of match your persistence at the moment to track your way through. It's like the best of both worlds, if you will. It's like
I completely agree.
All of this stuff to feed your curiosity, but just containered enough to walk you through it. That's what.
And that also restores a bit of agency. If you like, you're the one who chooses what's internalized instead of everything coming towards you and being a bit overwhelming. I had that issue. I remember when I approached MIT courses, I was like, oh God, what do I do? I want to do everything. Yeah. And then I had that, and I had the immunology course, and I had Patrick Winston's, I had the AI course, and then I had the mind and machine course. So, but it had, I noticed that the structure in which they're presented, and then the individual structure of the individual courses actually helped me tone down that initial anxiety. And I was like, okay, hang on, I can sort of find my way through it. So it wasn't that overwhelming. Yeah.
It's a helpful feature to not have a defined end date where you have to finish it all by, right? Yeah. We got some other questions about kind of the shifting information, content landscape out in the world, and between, say, all the shows that we can stream online and short form videos that social media is pushing out. What role do you think on an ongoing basis platforms like MIT Open Learning can play in fostering, supporting, stewarding that sort of like ability for deeper learning? This is kind of building on what we've just been talking about, but maybe anything more to think about there with like
opportunities for deep learning.
Deeper learning, beyond the short form stuff or the pure entertainment stuff. Yeah.
Oh, I think the crux is, maybe sounds a bit, elitist, the quality of it, right? The rigor, the fact that it's not something it's not, I mean, it is entertaining and it's definitely rewarding, but it's not something you can just brush the surface of, right? It's not something that can be, you just take a look at and you dab in and out of this course and then you move on to another. It takes a certain amount of engagement, depth of engagement. Does this answer your question?
Yeah.
It's something that, again, takes me back to what we were saying earlier about the protective effects of lifelong learning and its implications on your mental health and well-being and resilience. And there are, maybe two things to note. The benefits we outlined are dose dependent and also cumulative, right? You don't derive the same benefits if you dab in and out of interests, and you don't do it in a sustained type of rigorous engagement. And I think at least the courses I've completed and the ones I'm looking at now don't really allow for that type of entertainment-led involvement. You have to apply yourself, and again, without that threat that can arise from too high stakes. Like you said, you pace yourself, and there are micro wins, and it comes with sheets, and you can do the exercises, and then you read you do the assignments, and it sort of requires a certain level of depth from the learner in terms of engagement that underpins deep learning and the benefits that come with that.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, good. Yeah, in conversations with colleagues around here, we are talking increasingly about how to complement that depth with like the right forms of engagement. To have things be MIT good without, right off the bat having them all be so hard academically. Colleagues over at the MIT Museum who are talking about this concept of depth on demand, right? Where you meet people with, really engaging things, to sort of pique their curiosity, but then be able to flow through and follow through with that. Feels like a really important set of things to be developing over time, and I look forward to us being able to get into that more and more.
I think hard, the hardness, difficulty is something that people go for. At least myself, and I, when I looked at these courses, I was actually quite happy that they're hard, that I didn't understand, because and it's normal, I think, for periods of overwhelm and doubt and fatigue to occur, because the courses are so difficult and so rigorous. But again, if we look at it from a neuroscientific perspective, it's that level of challenge and that limbic friction, we call it, that friction, that sense of I'm a bit overwhelmed and I'm a bit scared, but it's exactly that sense of challenge that drives neuroplasticity and then helps with the motivation to stay on track. So I'm sure that other people will agree. The reason why we approach these courses is that they were excellent, right? Exquisite in terms of the quality of the material and how they're taught, but also because they're just in that Goldilocks zone of difficulty, right? If something is too easy, the brain gets bored. If something is too hard, then those defense mechanisms I mentioned earlier are titillated, and the desire to keep going is dampened. But I think they're perfectly poised on that angle of the Goldilocks zone of just above that level of competence, and maybe a bit higher for motivation to keep you going. So I was happy that they're hard. And some of them were so hard that I have chunks of them that I couldn't approach fully. Professor Alan Adams's quantum mechanics one. I got to the harmonic oscillator bit. I still, even now, I have shivers down my spine, and it took me quite a while to work my way out of that jungle and murky waters.
Yeah.
But I had a human study buddy, and I was, I think, disciplined enough to keep going. So yeah, I kind of like the fact that they're, they're a bit harder than my muscles can fight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that material will always be there for you, so you can keep coming back to it. Yeah. So I think we're about to draw to a close. Maybe I'll pose this very briefly. One last question from our audience about, any thoughts on sort of cultural or organizational practices that might help foster this sort of environment. And for me, for instance, that raises, something that we're very committed to, which is this sense of knowledge as a public good. That this knowledge being out there and shared freely with the world and supporting that is a really important cultural practice that sets the stage for people such as yourself to have access to these materials. And if any brief thought on a cultural practice that you would like to see supported more to help foster this sort of curiosity, I'd love to hear about it.
The first thing that comes to mind, and maybe not the most relevant one, is connected to what I said earlier, the sense of safety.
Yeah.
The sense of low stakes, right? Yeah. The sense of looseness and autonomy, the not always having to do something for some extrinsic good, right? The sense of I'm doing this not because I'm judged and not because there's always a job down the line and I have to complete this course, otherwise I won't keep the job. And I have to complete this program in order to, accede to, a better job and whatnot. To sometimes keep it low stakes and not with either a hatchet above one's head or with an immediate goal, which is maybe not even related to the main interest in the first place, but to allow for curiosity and supporting motivation to arise naturally, to allow for more looseness in people to move and choose their areas of interest and then pursue it in a less judgmental way. Just people feeling more supported and lifted. I'm using dance terms rather than constantly, evaluated and pushed in a, do this so you can grab the other type of way. Does that make sense?
Yes, it sure does. I think that's a wonderful sort of way to wrap the conversation. May we all find these safe, inviting spaces to engage in learning in just that sort of way. Yeah. I really appreciate that. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Bia. So glad that you've been able to share your experiences and your perspectives and insights with us. Your drive to help others and yourself is inspirational. So thank you to everyone who's tuned in and joined this conversation. We welcome you to keep learning with MITx, with MIT OpenCourseWare, and with MIT Open Learning. We also welcome you to support our work by sharing our resources with your friends, colleagues, and families, sharing your experiences and your stories of how you've used these free resources with us. Share those stories with us. And if you're in a position to do so, please do consider donating to support our efforts and the thousands of people who use our free resources every day. And until our next open conversation, I wish you a fond farewell, and thanks again, Bia, for joining us today.